when we use metaphors that the thinker brings forward, we have an opportunity to go very deeply below the surface to what is really driving the things that are at the top of the iceberg, right? Actions, results, actions, results. But if we don't deal with those deeper underlying drivers, it is often very difficult to have an outcome that lasts for people.
Hello, welcome everyone to our penultimate session, Metaphors That Move Minds. And it's absolutely an honor and privilege to welcome on stage Lisa Dihat for all of you. Lisa, welcome. You are not new to our audience, but still, I would give a quick introduction and inspiring bio that you have. I would like to read it for the audience to know, your background. Lisa is LICSW MCC BCC EMCC. Is the author of Story Jacking, Change Your Dialogue, Transform Your Life, The Reflective Coach, and Light Up, The Science of Coaching with Metaphors. She's also the host of the Coaching Studio podcast. She is a recovering therapist, confidence coach, certified mentor coach, coaching supervision partner, ICF PCC assessor, and coaching educator. Her understanding of ICF core competencies and neuroscience instills confidence in her ability to guide professional coaches. She empowers them to enhance their client outcomes through deep listening, client led approaches, and ultimately by fostering a partnership that empowers their clients. In 2018, she began to develop the groundbreaking Power of Metaphor program. This innovative program equips coaches to harness the metaphors their clients use, a crucial element in fostering stronger agreements, trust, and powerful embodied awareness. In 2022, she introduced the updated credentialing exam prep. This resource has significantly aided over 6,000 coaches in preparing for the updated ICF exam, a testament to her profound impact on the coaching industry. In 2024, she introduced the ACE prep for the ICF ACC credentialing exam. Wow, such an inspiring bio. And I must say that, in India, all the YouTube videos and the resources that you have published for consumption for the public, I think that is the go-to resource for preparation for the credentialing exams.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
we are very grateful for the work that you are doing.
I am very grateful that it has been so useful to people. So I really, really appreciate that. And side note on the exam, I started playing around with it before it came out, and I was like, oh no, this is going to be really hard. And so that was sort of the beginnings of creating these programs, and they've really just evolved since then. And I heard you say 6,000 people. I think it's well over 7 at this point. It's amazing how many people have utilized that training. It's crazy. But thank you so much for having me today.
So we have 88 people in the session at this moment. They're slowly joining.
Wonderful.
So leave the stage to you, and I'll go to the backstage and come up when the question and answers needs to be addressed.
Sounds great. I am going to find the screen that I need to share, and I want to make sure everybody can see it. So let me know if anybody has any trouble seeing my slides. I'll just look to the chat real quick. Oh, good. Thank you. I thank you for the thumbs up. I appreciate it. Very clear. Very good. Excellent. Well, welcome to, and I know it's Metaphors That Move Minds, and I forgot to add that piece to my initial slide, but that you are in the right place. We will be going through metaphors. and that I believe they do move minds. Some of what we're going to be covering today has to do with really how metaphors do not only live within the ICF Competency 7 evokes awareness. I see them as moving throughout all of the competencies, and we'll have a conversation about that. Metaphors that I've heard, I'd love to hear from you guys what you've heard in the chat when we get there. And really the concept of metaphors, the idea containers, the conceptual metaphors. I have a coaching demo. It is AI generated voice for the thinker or client that I'm sharing to protect their anonymity. So, but it is a real conversation that I had with somebody. So you'll hear that, and then we'll go into having a conversation about what came up for you guys in that, and then some other elements before we get to the final Q&A. I will be asking questions along the way. Please do feel free to use the Q&A so that I can see them without having to follow the entire chat. But let's begin with this idea of thinker and thought partner. This really comes out of Nancy Klein's work around thinking environments, and she wrote a book called A Time to Think. And this had shown up in a conversation I was having with another coach, which led me to really start to look at the way that we speak about the people that we work with. And I hear client, I hear coachee, and I have to be honest, I really don't like coachee. It sounds very much like we're talking about a child, and that's just my personal bias and perspective. That doesn't mean anybody who does that needs to change it. But from my perspective, the idea of equality and that we're on the same level, or actually the client thinker is maybe above me in the sense that they know themselves better than I know them, really made the idea of thinker evolve in my mind as maybe a more partnered way of thinking about the person I'm working with. And so you'll hear me go back and forth between client and thinker throughout the conversation. But thinking also, and just to kind of discern this out or suss it out just a bit more, is really a whole body thinking. It is not just a head thinking. The brain aggregates information that we receive from our environment, from our perspectives, our beliefs, the experiences that we've had, and it makes meaning. But our thinking happens throughout our entire system, which is part of the reason I think understanding sematics and how words align with the somatic experience that a person is having is so crucially important. So when you hear me say thinkers, no, I'm not talking about just the head. I'm talking about the whole bodily experience. So let's get into it. Let's see, why is this not showing up? Where's my slide? What happened? Oh, there we go. Okay. So really taking a look at metaphors through the lens of all the competencies, I see that this idea that we partner with people in a way where we are hearing the words that they are saying. We are using their language. We are using the ways that they are conceptualizing both their struggle or problem or challenge, but also in the direction of what they want. And so I think oftentimes if we get past, I need a list or I need steps for sure is a metaphor, and we get to what is changed for you when you have a list or when you have these steps. What will happen often is the thinker will go someplace a little deeper, which is often to an experience. Like I'll be more confident, or I'll have clarity, or I'll have something that allows me to move forward. And that really fundamentally is what coaching is about, right? It's about, we have a challenge or a struggle and we want to move forward. So I think metaphors then become a way of creating a container of a coaching conversation so that we can one, understand the struggle. Struggle is in and of itself a metaphor, and the movement towards something else. So I see metaphors showing up in agreement setting. I see them showing up in how I'm maintaining presence and listening to the person that I'm working with. I'm staying grounded in their language. I'm partnering with them fully. I'm very attuned to them. And I'm listening to the nuance of the language that they are using and the meaning that they are making in the way they are thinking about or experiencing the struggle or challenge to the outcome they want. I also think that it is around evoking awareness. So I definitely think when we use metaphors that the thinker brings forward, we have an opportunity to go very deeply below the surface to what is really driving the things that are at the top of the iceberg, right? Actions, results, actions, results. But if we don't deal with those deeper underlying drivers, it is often very difficult to have an outcome that lasts for people. I show this doormat, and I'm sure everybody is pretty familiar with doormats. I think they are everywhere in the world, that there is a door and dirt. And when I say to you, I need to go to the store and get a doormat, you know pretty clearly I'm talking about a thing, right? What shifts when I say, I feel like a doormat at work? Well, how does that change the nuance of the language that I am using? And I'm going to wait for a second. I'd love to hear from somebody. What shifts for you when you become the doormat? And what would you rather be? Yeah, yeah, everyone is using me. I think that's beautiful. I'm not treated well. I'm an underdog. I'm being taken for granted. It hits us hard, right? Like we have a somatic experience of people wiping their feet on us. And so as a coach, if I hear somebody saying, I'm having a big trouble at work and my boss is really tough on me and I'm not enjoying myself, I really feel like a doormat and I just need to I need some ways to find a new job. Well, the problem is oftentimes when we have something like a boundaried issue or people treating us poorly, we have an opportunity to work on it in the place that we are, because we often will take the same behaviors with us into the new job and find ourselves acting or being treated like a doormat all over again. So it's an opportunity to explore, what would you prefer to be if not a doormat? And anything may come out of the thinker at that point. My own personal example would be, I would be a door. Doors open, they close. I can lock the door. Depending on the kind of door I am, I might be able to see through the door. I can open it a crack and just chat with somebody. Maybe I'm a door with a peephole. Like I can be all kinds of different doors in order to start to create healthy structures for myself. And so at that point now we've got, where am I at? I'm a doormat. Where do I want to be? I want to be a door. What are going to be the indicators to you that you've become this door that you want to be? Well, I'm going to feel more powerful. I'm going to feel confident. I can see some places, I can open and close. I can lock myself. There's all kinds of different things doors get to do that doormats don't. And so this becomes also a sense of agency. And somebody wrote that in the chat. We want to help people move to that state of agency. And so a simple word, though, that is often overlooked in a conversation because we get stuck on the fact that we hate our job and we don't like our boss and we want to maybe find a new job. If we move directly into solution and solving problems, we're going to miss this opportunity to explore a very deep belief system that we're experiencing. And as a result, it's a hugely missed opportunity. Some of the metaphors that I hear pretty regularly in work have to do with people feeling like they're running on treadmills or running on hamster wheels. There's a lot of leaning into and leaning away from that goes on, jumping hurdles, confidence taking a hit, feeling frozen, having a full plate, juggling. I didn't put that one down, but that one is often around. People juggle all the time. Being on the fence about something, or at a fork in the road, or at a decision point. right? These are all metaphors. Maybe I've been grinding and pushing so hard and I'm just exhausted, right? And wanting clarity. Clarity in and of itself is a word that means it's clear, but it's also a metaphor when it becomes owned. I have clarity. What is clarity to you? How do you know when you have clarity? We can explore these words a little more deeply. And I'm curious, before we go on too far, I would love to hear, are there any metaphors that you hear in your own work? And I'm going to keep going, but I'll come back to them if there's some metaphors that you hear pretty consistently. And they may be very similar to the ones that I have heard, but there may be something sort of unique that you've heard that it was sort of now in retrospect, you're like, that was a metaphor. Metaphor comes from the Greek word metaphora, which is this, the meaning is to take one thing and use it to describe another thing. That's basically what a metaphor is. And what they do is they are idea containers that take an idea and move it from one word to another way of thinking about that word. So for instance, if I say I'm a hamster on a wheel, we all know I'm not an actual hamster. I mean, I'm a little big to be a hamster, and I don't actually have a wheel that I'm running on. But the idea of running on a wheel is a pretty common experience that people have when they feel like maybe they're working really hard and not getting very far. Now, some people love to yeah, some people love to run on wheels. I think we call them, like, I don't know, treadmills. But it tells us something. And so here are some other ones. Stuck up in a tunnel. That's a really interesting one. Tunnels really speak also to confined spaces, and they always, tunnels actually always have two openings. So what is behind you in the tunnel and what is in front of you in the tunnel? Often there is light at the end of a tunnel, or there's something that's at the end of this tunnel that we're moving towards, or maybe one of the directions is the direction we want to. We may be stuck between two outcomes. It could be anything, but it's an amazing place to get curious. Feeling like a punching bag. I mean, that tells you somatically a lot about what the person is experiencing in that moment. And I think that's really, really important. For us, the way that metaphors really came to my attention had to do with the work of Lakey and Johnson, and so I'm sorry, Lakoff and Johnson, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, and they came up in the 80s. They were linguists, and they started working on, this language that isn't just for poets and writers, but is just the way people communicate. And I think on the last slide it said people tend to say somewhere between 15 and 70 metaphors for every 1,000 words they say. And what they discovered was that there were 4 primary conceptual metaphors, and the 4 were: thinking is moving, thinking is seeing, thinking is object manipulation, and thinking is eating. And when you think about our early ancestors, they were moving as tribal people through vast landscapes, and they had to be able to situate themselves. We're close to the mountain, we're near the river, we're at our cave, wherever it was that they were moving through locations. They were moving, often following herds of animals. And so there's a lot of movement in the metaphors, but it also aligns with structures in the brain that have to do with this movement. Thinking is seeing. Human beings have evolved to put a lot of resources into the wiring for vision. Even if you're a non-sighted person, you still have the neuro wiring for vision. And so while you may not think in pictures exactly the same way, you will probably be thinking in somatic experiences. temperature. So things become hot or cold. I'm feeling this, that comment left me cold, or I'm on fire for this idea. These things become ways that we're experiencing the world around us. Thinking is object manipulation. And this is a really interesting one because we are not the only tool users on the planet. We've got some other animals that also use tools, but I think it would be fair to say we are the greatest tool users on the planet. That I'm coming to you from the Seattle area, and we are, halfway literally around the world. And then the final one is thinking is eating. And as you think about eating, what is one of the fundamental requirements of life is that we have sustenance and nutrition, right? And so our early ancestors were constantly moving and thinking about food resources. And so there are structures in the brain that are very hardwired for these um, conceptual areas. And so it should not hopefully be surprising that these conceptual idea containers then show up as metaphors. The way that we need to digest information, or we have a full plate, or we're juggling, or I'm struggling or wrestling with a challenge. These things, they come up just all the time in language. I've expanded the way that I perceive the conceptual metaphors. I still have the movement and the visual and the object and manipulation based and the food based metaphors that I'm listening for, but I'm also listening for things like I'm on fire and that sensation based, emotion based. It's like I feel like I've just swallowed a heavy pill, is something I heard somebody say. Like, wow, a heavy pill. Like, I mean, I've taken some big pills, but that experience of a heavy pill tells you something. And then there's also the ones that are, identity based. The doormat would be a great example of that. The punching bag. A punching bag is a punching bag unless I'm the punching bag, right? And then there's also space and where I fit within. We hear people talk about balance all the time, and like, what is balance? But this ability to sort of move between, two positions and do it in a way that is comfortable. I can stand here comfortably like this. I'm not leaning this way or that way. I'm in a state of balance, right? And those become states. And so I think these things become very important in the way that we are listening to the people we are working with. So I want to just check and see if there's any Q&As, and then I will, and this is a link right here. If you want to follow the QR code, it'll let you know more about my Coaching with Metaphor program. And so you can check that out. And then I'm going to do the audio only. Remember, this is an AI voice that I used for the thinker so that it would keep her anonymous. So when someone says doormat, it sounds unimportant. Would rather be a door handle or a door itself, something that enables entry. I think it's up to the thinker. So for me, if you asked me the question, I heard you say you're a doormat, that sounds important. What would you, if we were going to explore what's going on for you with the struggle you're having at work, what would you prefer to be? If you were no longer a doormat, what would you be? And the person might say, I'd prefer to be a door. They might say something else. They may say something like, I don't know, I just prefer to be empowered. What is empowerment? What is the experience of empowerment? I feel like dun dun dun. I feel like a superhero or something like that. Excellent. So it could be a movement from a doormat to a superhero. That's totally fine as well. But we want to be in partnership and asking these questions. A superhero then has certain qualities. What are the qualities that indicate you're moving into your superpowers? And we're continuing along in a way that allows the person to explore this idea of doormat, and also the movement towards the directionality towards what they want. And both of those are metaphorical, the doormat and the superhero. Was there any most surprising metaphor you've heard from a client that, yes, and I'll talk about that later. So we'll come back to that one. Great question. And do remind me if I don't get there, but I'm going to. Let me make sure that I have this so that you guys can here. Well, I love that you brought your hand up so quickly. Thank you for being willing to be my partner in this quick demonstration. Can everybody hear that? Okay, good. So I'm just saying thank you for being my partner in this quick demonstration. What'd you like to do in this session today?
Well, lately, I have been in a space of like hurry up and wait for a lot of different things. Um, and now, kind of like a lot of things, they are converging all at the same time. So I'm finding myself in the space where like I have too much on my plate, where I've been waiting for a long time for like something to be on my plate. Specifically, lately, I have found myself in a partnership and I have a weird feeling about it. And like I can't decide if it's fruitful or not. I guess I'm trying to figure out like what do I do? Because I just have so many things on my plate. I am just trying to sort it all out, right? And I feel like I've been really mindful on like what I'm saying yes and no to. And now I'm like I was so mindful to saying yes. So I'm just feeling so overwhelmed right now.
I'm really hearing the overwhelmed. And I'm curious as you look at this full plate, given that we're going to be talking for about 15 to 20 minutes, what would you like to do with this plate by the end of our conversation?
I think now I really need to say no to things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so mindful about saying yes. Right now, I am just feeling overwhelmed and I don't know what to do. It's really stressing me out. I think it'd be helpful at least, like clarify maybe at least like one or two things that I could at least say no to today.
So, clarifying a couple of things that you could maybe say no to. As you're looking at that plate, where would you like to begin exploring about those things?
Well, I have one partnership. I had an opportunity to join some friends who were starting a consulting firm, and I was really excited about it at first. And the more I get into it, the more I have like not a hard no, but just a lot of questions that it feels like really unresolved.
Do you have a sense of what's really important that's driving that discomfort or that uncertainty?
There's constantly conflict in the group that doesn't need to be there.
What would you need to be at a hard yes?
I like to keep it.
I don't know. I'm just curious what would be different for you if you were to be able to keep it on your plate?
Yeah. Well, that's the part that I'm not sure about. It feels like I don't know if this is reasonable, but feels like in my life right now, I want things that are easy and or entirely enjoyable. Like I'm in the season of my life where either I enjoy them fully or I don't do them. I just like I want to live in my superpowers, you know? I mean, I am willing to put in the hard work, but I don't want the drama.
What does it tell you when you hear yourself say that in regard to this situation?
It feels like that's 100% not the situation. Like it doesn't fit either criteria. And so then, which I know, but then I'm like, okay, well, is that criteria reasonable? Right. And so then I keep going back to you, like, is that a reasonable expectation?
That's a very interesting question. How do you know when things are reasonable or not?
I don't know, because it feels like, you know, the old adage, like, if you find something you love, you'll never work a day in your life, right? It feels like even that doesn't seem reasonable because all work is work, right? Like, I think about, for instance, like I'm doing this coach training, right? And let's say I enjoy it by the end of this training and I love it so much that I change my entire life and I am just full time coaching. There's going to be some kind of like bookkeeping or paperwork I'm going to have to do. And I know I would rather not do that, but there's going to have to be like a section of my life that's like keeping track of paperwork, right?
When you look at this idea, maybe the coaching is the plate, and you look at it, and there are things on the plate that maybe you don't love, but then there's other things on the plate that maybe you love a lot. How do you determine when there's enough of what you love versus how much you don't love on the plate?
Looking wholly at the plate like a balanced meal.
I don't know. Is that what you do?
I've never had the luxury of looking at my plate like that. It's kind of been like you're eating gruel. Be thankful you're eating, you know? And so I think there are two pieces. Number one, is it even a realistic criteria? And number two, um, it seems almost like a luxury to even be taking the time to being choosy about that. Like, who am I to even be choosy about that?
When we started, you mentioned moving towards how do you know to let go of something that might be on this plate? And I'm hearing, and I could be wrong, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm also hearing that when you have an opportunity to really look at the plate you'd like to have in front of you, there's maybe some discomfort with just going, that's the plate I want. How does that land on you?
Well, I think it's two things. The first thing is that I think that the moment I say, I want to do something with you, and then I do it, and inside I'm like, no, never mind. I think there's a, I think there's a lot of, I'm really, yeah, I am really attached to being a person of my word. And so even if I'm like, you and I both know us working together is not working. Bigger than that is me being a person of my word. And then the other piece is me having a plate that I desire and love. That comes secondary to obligations that the plate funds and supports.
Okay, this is interesting because earlier in class we had that conversation around recontracting. And I'm curious, is there a place between where you have a new or need to recontract so that you're balancing this idea of my word means my bond is forever to the detriment of the plate that I prefer to have?
Yeah. Um, hmm.
That's a face.
That's the face I make when my brain explodes. I'm like, I don't know what that means. Yeah, it would be shifting what it means to have a plate to begin with. And that because then it would mean like the plate could actually be a place that's enjoyable, number one. And then it could mean that like lives won't end if I just have a conversation with you and say, "Hey, I know that we showed up in this with the whole full understanding and it's time to renegotiate that." And that it's not me failing my word. It's actually just me renegotiating.
There seems, and again, I could be wrong, but it seems like there's an energy shift as you said that. What are you noticing as you say that out loud?
Freedom. Like literally like my whole energy did shift and change. Like even talking about it before I felt ugh, like bondage and like failure. I felt failure. This entire conversation, I was like, I don't want to talk about failing, you know? And then you're like, what if you renegotiated that? I was like, I was like, oh, well, I could just renegotiate everything then.
So you could just renegotiate everything. What does it look like when you renegotiate this plate?
That almost means like everything is up for discussion then. You know, it's almost like I have this contract, right? And the contract is like you do things out of obligation. You do things and you're tied to pleasing other people. You do things, right? So, like every item on the contract, if we're going to renegotiate the one thing, then you might as well renegotiate the whole thing, right? So, it was like this like liberation that just happened.
So, what is the thing that you need to take off the plate?
Yeah, cool. Shit. Yeah, the everything.
The everything.
Like the whole load, the load entirely. I feel like everything. I think I have to clear the plate and renegotiate everything because I think everything that was put on there, because the plate under new terms might look very similar. But I think everything right now is on there with a certain understanding that I no longer want to hold.
Do you have a value or character strength that you could use to support yourself in holding accountable to this awareness?
Yeah, loyalty. I think I've always had loyalty as one of my highest values, but I've always interpreted it as loyalty to other people instead of like a loyalty to self-care, or so like not self-preservation, because that's like survivalist, but like loyalty to my thriving and well-being.
So, what's the first thing that you might want to do with this plate?
Dump it. Um I think I think the first thing I need is to like get a divided dish. First of all, I hate my food to touch. That's super gross. But in reality, though, a divided dish, because I think that would help me be really honest about what can fit on it, you know? Because the divided dishes have the like portions, right? And it's like there's 6 containers or whatever. And then when I go into it, then I can say like, "Oh, you want to work together? Cool. Well, I only have like 3 containers left. So let me like be really honest about that commitment." And like that's where I'm at. That's what am I thinking and what am I feeling?
How do you do that then?
I think it would be to get a divided dish. And then also, I mean, referencing our, because you referenced our conversation from before, um, also to say, sometimes you move from contracts to month, right? And I think I've been managing my plate as like a lifelong contract. And so maybe looking at my plate both as a divided dish instead of just like buffet plate of like piling. Ugh. So a divided dish. And then also thinking about it more like a month to month kind of situation. So it's more like, yes, and we'll see how it goes. Right. But that's never been a factor for me before.
How does this feel? Do you feel like you got something off your plate?
I'm not even being funny. Like, you transformed my life, right? I'm being so serious. I'm being so serious. I'm like, I need to go call a bunch of people and say, you're off my plate. It was like so good. Like, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. And there's some questions in the chat. So I want to kind of go and answer some of these questions. I'm going to come to the surprising metaphor. There's a few of you who asked that. I'm going to share that a little bit later. But I think the question about what makes metaphor such a transformational tool in a coaching conversation and how do you lean into it or let it go? We're going to go back to what I said about the owned metaphor. I may speak very metaphorically. And so in speaking very metaphorically, I will probably say a lot of metaphors. They're not all going to be owned. I may say, it's like, oh my gosh, it's just been so frustrating. And I'm like, feel like I'm hitting my head against a wall. And, you know, it's like, there's only so much energy in the day. So here's something where you've got the metaphor of energy in the day, but also hitting my head against the wall. It gives me a context to test a hypothesis, because the hitting my head against a wall is completely an owned metaphor. And so I'm hearing the hitting your head against a wall. And how is this a conversation about how do you recapture energy, or like what's showing up for you as you listen to yourself having shared that? And in that way, we're asking, and this really goes into the questions, and there's several of them that have to do with whether how do you be culturally competent? And my sense of cultural competency is this. There's 80 people, let's say, in the room, and you all maybe live in similar places in the world. There may be people from other places in the world like me, but there may be a lot of people who you grew up next to, and the language that they use is going to be unique to them. The way that they use the words, what they mean by those words, is going to be unique to them. And I kind of think of cultural competence as I'm meeting the one human being in front of me where that human being is. And I don't know that there's any other way to be more culturally competent with anybody than to meet them as an individual, unique human being in a conversation and listen to the language that they bring forward, which really brings me into, another part of this, which is, you know, if we are to be culturally competent and led by the thinker, then using their language is probably one of the most important ways that we can do that. There's a couple questions that are like, what makes metaphors so important in coaching conversations? I guess I would throw that back to you guys. You just heard a coaching demonstration that demonstrated the use of a full plate, but also got into boundaries. Like, I need a divided dish, and the client is coming up with outcomes, and she's had an experience and she didn't feel like she was failing. She was worried she was going to have this conversation and talk about how she's failing. And instead we're talking about a plate. So I would say, how do you see the metaphor having been useful in this conversation with this particular thinker? And put that in the chat, because I'd be really curious to see what you guys think. But I think that the metaphors can be very unique to the human being. And this really brings me to the metaphor of that was the most surprising. So the first conversation, the demo that you just heard, was one of my early moments of epiphany about how important these metaphors were, that really began the change in how I was thinking about metaphors in conversations, because it was so rich with metaphor. And later, as I'm playing with this, I had a client from China, and I said, she was talking about writing a book, and there were all these steps she needed to take. And I said something to the effect of, you know, is that what we're doing? Walking along a path, the steps of taking the steps on a path. And she goes, no. In China, we say you cross a river by feeling the stones. And if you've ever been in a big river, you know, if you get out far enough, it can be slippery. They're not always sandy bottomed. There's the current may look smooth on the top, but there's a thick current or fast current underneath. And you have to kind of go carefully if you're crossing, depending on the kind of river you're in and how you're crossing it. And so for me, that was just another really great example. I had conceptualized an idea container of steps on a path. Her conceptual idea was crossing a river by feeling the stones. And so I said to her, is that what we're doing? And one, most beautiful metaphor I'd heard to that point. Is that what we're doing? And she said, yeah. And I said, what is the first stone we need to feel? And in this way, she knew exactly what it was. And so we started talking about how she wasn't prioritizing her writing. And it just became each stone. What's the next stone? What's the next stone? Where are we in the river? You know, there were all these ways of touching base using the metaphor of this crossing a river. So I hope that answers some of these questions. And I mean, so part of it is with this, we've got this idea of the somatics. They're not always obvious, but I mean, if you think about crossing a river, I mean, I can't see hands, but most of us have crossed a river that has had slippery stones in it, I'm guessing. And that's a somatic experience of having to kind of constantly adjust your balance, really making sure of foot placement. That is a somatic metaphor. We aren't just moving through space, which we are doing also, but we're having a tactile experience. This is a rich metaphor to explore. And again, it's owned. You know, we're crossing a river. And so that ownership is really important. I think also, like, I look at the work of Vicki Lay. She's a professor out of the University of Arizona who has done a lot of research around novel versus conventional metaphors and what they do to the brain. And what they've found in EEGs and fMRIs is that that when we have a conventional metaphor that we're used to, something that just we hear all the time and we know exactly what it means, like a full plate, our brain doesn't have to hardly do any work at all. But when we hear a novel metaphor, something we've never heard before, like I was listening to somebody talk about really needing to have a difficult conversation, and in their culture it was putting the fish on the table, because it was kind of, you know, putting the fish on the table, sort of a stinky thing. And so I had never heard that metaphor before, and So it was novel to me. But what is important here, and this is why I really feel like it's important as coaches that we listen to the metaphors that our clients and thinkers bring forward, is that that metaphor of the fish on the table was not novel to the thinker. It was only novel to me, and it doesn't matter if it's novel or conventional to me. It only matters that I hear it. Is that what we're doing? Putting the fish on the table. Yes, I have to put the fish on the table. And how would you like that? Like, how would you like to deal with the fish that's on the table? And there could be any number of things that come out of that for the person that maybe people really take time to listen and not just get reactive. And so how do we start to create that kind of sense of calm that thinker is wanting? So I want to stop here just real quick. And see if there's any thing else in here. As I understand, the metaphor can be extended with the context if the metaphor is introduced by the thinker. And I do think it can, because I think there are times, so the rest of the question is, do you think a metaphor introduced by the thought partner can be equally effective to hit it with a bang, to hit it bang on with the thinker? And I would say yes. I'm not going to say, as a coach, never bring forward a metaphor. They can be quite useful. The problem is if the client or thinker has already introduced a metaphor, they've already conceptualized it, and you bring in your take on the metaphor, then you run the risk of what is called in therapeutic terms cognitive load, because now they're having to get out of flow with their own thinking. They've already conceptualized the metaphor. We just didn't hear it. That's not their fault. That's ours. And now we're adding another layer of context to it with our own metaphor. What if it doesn't make sense to them? What have we just done? We probably, now they're having to think, does, like, I'm crossing a river by feeling the stones, and you just introduced, Lissa, that it's like salmon swimming up a stream. Like, now I'm really confused. And so I think we have to be very, very mindful about where we introduce our own metaphors. And have I come across coaching conversations where I hear a completely new metaphor, which I was not aware of? And I think I've kind of answered that. I handle it by going with the metaphor the client brought forward and maybe asking a little bit more about it. Like, I don't want to assume putting fish on a table is a bad conversation, but in context of the way it was shared with me, it was a bad conversation they were preparing to have. And the way they described it was putting the fish on the table. So I was like, well, and so if you were to put the fish on the table, how would you like to serve that fish, right? And so I'm just going with the metaphor. It doesn't matter that I personally understand it. Question, please elaborate how the coach explores the metaphor of the client. The meaning, the feelings, emotions of the client could be explored for richness. Do you go below the iceberg? I mean, that was 20 minutes ago before the demonstration. Let me ask you, did that conversation go deep enough? Did the client not only explore the plate, but did it go deep enough? And I would say, yeah. I mean, for her, it transformed her life, and without the cognitive load, right? So the reality is she didn't have that added stress. And so, yeah, putting the fish on the table also discusses the difficulty of conversations. It doesn't necessarily mean something bad or stinky. It could mean anything. I mean, some of us, I do, serve fish and we love it. It tastes great. It's a wonderful, beautiful meal. So depending on the person, the context may change. So, but they will often give you the context with the metaphor. I'm really struggling with a boss that I don't like, and I feel like a doormat, or I've been so mindful of saying yes to so many things. Now I have too much stuff on my plate. I mean, they've given you context. You're not making a huge assumption when you assume that maybe the plate is a little overly full. But then you ask, what would you like to do with this plate? And they say, I'd like to maybe take one or two things off the plate by the end of the conversation. So, and cognitive load is really, It's a theory that came from John Sweller, and it really is how our brain works with certain limits. And if you get too much stuff going on, it's really hard to hold it all together. And so I see metaphors because they are idea containers. The person doesn't have to explain the entire situation. I didn't ask her anything about the business associate where there's a lot of drama. We didn't go into any of that sort of stuff. We just stayed with what she wanted to do with this plate and how she wanted to explore the different parts of the plate. And I think in that way, kept it clean. And the reality is we're language speaking, creatures. And so we use language to communicate our thoughts, ideas, beliefs, values, the way that we're seeing our problems and insights that we're having. When she made the face in the real demonstration, she made a face that was like, and I was like, oh no, what just happened there? So I go, that's a face. What just happened there? And she goes, that's the face I make when my mind gets blown. And and you're testing the hypotheses. I mean, the face could have meant anything also, but it is an expression of an experience that a person is having. And at that point, another choice point might have been, and what just blew your mind? What are you taking away with you? Right. But these words coming from the mind of the person you are working with are so much more powerful than the words that you might bring up personally yourself. I think the other thing that this example does beautifully, but in metaphors in general, when we learn how to actually use them well, is that it creates a level of psychological safety. We're talking about a plate. We're talking about a plate that has too much stuff on it, and she's agreed that there's like going to be, I don't know, green beans on it forever. And maybe she doesn't want to eat green beans every meal for the rest of her life. And so it's an opportunity to start to explore her relationship to how she says yes to things, the idea of taking everything off the plate and then reintroducing it in new ways with a new contract about a new way that we'll be with each other. Maybe I'm moving from a lifetime contract to a month to month to see how it goes. She's changing the rules of engagement with the plate. And I think it's just, it created the psychological safety that at the end she's saying, I was really worried we were going to talk about failing, that all I would be doing is failing and failing. And honestly, if you think about Richard Boyatz's work and the positive emotional attractors and the negative emotional attractors, you have a situation in which as soon as we get into what are you not doing well, why don't you have good boundaries, what stops you from setting healthier boundaries, why are you always saying yes? What would it take to say no to stuff? We're really going down that NEA, that negative emotional attractor bent. And what we're going to do is, the neuroscience demonstrates it, we're going to reduce motivation versus she's like, I need to get everything off my plate and I need to call some people and I need to say, you're off my plate. And that is a very different energetic motivational stance than, yeah, I kind of suck at setting boundaries. There's a huge energetic difference for the person involved. And I think what's really fascinating to me is that I had this conversation and I talked over her a little bit more in the real conversation because I was so excited about the metaphor. So I kind of cleaned it up a little bit. But one of the things that was really interesting is I had this conversation late 2017, sometime in 2018, probably 2018. So that is 7 years ago. She still remembers the conversation, as do I. I've heard it a few more times than her, but that's a sticky outcome. It transformed how she was thinking about her relationships. And she's still using it. So a couple more things real quick in the last few minutes that I have. I would love to answer some Q&As. I also have a monthly Q&A for coaches. It's my treat. You're welcome to follow the QR code and sign up for it. We just had it this month. We'll be having it again in September. And you're absolutely invited to it. And if you're at all interested, the book that this research that I'm sharing with you is based on, or the book is based on the research I'm sharing with you, is called Light Up, the Science of coaching with metaphors. So I'd love to just sort of have some help with the whole Q&A if there's any outstanding questions before we come to a close today.
Do we have any questions, or I think you have answered all the questions here. So we were supposed to flash, but you were so active on here. So you looked at the box by yourself and answered every question by yourself. Thank you very much for that. So
I think there are a couple of more questions. I think we can take one more, because we have a couple of more minutes. I think.
Okay, yeah.
that would be
So
great.
why did you classify "I really want clarity" on the next step as a metaphor? So one, this idea of "I want clarity." What is clarity? It's a conceptual idea. It's a word, but it has multiple meanings. There's the clarity of looking through a window. I can see that. Or there's the clarity I have in my mind on how I'm going to take the next step. It's like doormats, right? There's the doormat that we are going to go and buy at the store. And then there's the doormat that is how we perceive ourselves being treated. So it's the nuance of how we're listening to the language. When I need clarity, that's a metaphor. And it's clarity on a next step. Well, that's a metaphor also, because now we're moving. We have vision and movement engaging in the brain. And so it's a place to be curious. I wouldn't say assume that's it, that's the one, but I would say get curious. I'm hearing that the clarity on the next step, what would be important? Like, what would be different for you if you had clarity on the next step? As a coach, we can start then asking for indicators of what that clarity would how would they know they had it? I didn't do as much of that in this call because it was like literally 15, 14 minutes, 12 minutes with the AI. And so it's a couple of missed opportunities from a longer conversation. And so if you don't understand what the client means by the metaphor that they used, you ask. I do not ask about the meaning, like, explain that metaphor to me. What does it mean to cross a river by feeling the stones? I do not do that. I assume that it probably means something important. And so what I may say is, and how does that inform you of this situation? And they'll tell me without having to step out of flow of what they're thinking and meaning. How does that fish on the table apply in this situation? They'll explain it to me. So is that what we're doing then? Is there a different dish you'd prefer to put on the table? We can start playing with it at that point. Do you
I
guys
think
see?
there are too many questions. I would encourage all the participants to connect with Lisa, and because I know for sure she's very responsive there, and all my questions she keeps answering. So I would
I'm going to stop now.
encourage. So I would invite Sheila to offer a vote of thanks and formally end the session.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rajiv. Thank you, Lisa, so much for this wonderful session on metaphors, and that really moved the mind. So we have been learning a lot through your videos and your demo session that you showed just now, the clip that you shared. That's one of my favorite, and that my plate is full. It was so impactful, and the way you use that very metaphor to coach your client so beautifully. So that was, I mean, I have heard it before, and when I was listening to it again, it was giving me new kind of boundaries to cross. So today here also you made us realize how simple stories and images can open new ways to thinking and bringing fresh insights in here. So metaphors are idea containers that you said. It explains a lot. And we truly enjoyed learning from you, Lisa. And we carry back thoughts, ideas, reflections that will stay with us beyond today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you all, and have a wonderful rest of your conference at the Roots and Wings, and really have a wonderful rest of your sessions.
Thank you.